I'd like to call on Commissioner Davis if he would, to give us our introduction.
If you will, pray with me. Our Heavenly Father, we are grateful to you each day for the opportunity that you give us to serve first and foremost you and to serve our fellow man. We ask that any decision that will be made will be in the best interest of all the citizens of Scotland County. And we pray that each of us will hear what is about to be said with an open mind and an open heart. These things we ask in your name. Amen.
You would please rise, face the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. As you know, our subject this afternoon is referendums and the laws that govern those in North Carolina as it pertains to the funding of public projects. We have as our guest speaker today someone who is very knowledgeable in this field. He is an attorney with the School of Government. I actually have sat in some of his symposiums earlier. I came in, there's no reason for him to remember me, but I have was trained at what I still refer to as the Institute of Government. I think it started back in the 1930s, and no, I wasn't in their first class. I was in some that came along after that. I have been trained with them as a juvenile court counselor in the 70s, as a parole supervisor, as a prison superintendent, as the clerk of court, and as a county commissioner. They do the best job. Their whole purpose when they were first established 80 years ago was to improve the way governmental officials transact business, and they've done a great job with that. Bob Joyce is a lawyer and a member of the faculty there. His fields of work include election law, public employment law. He's been at the School of Government since 1980. If you'll please welcome Bob Joyce. One last thing, if you don't mind. What we're going to do is we're going to have him make a presentation of whatever duration. After that, the commissioners will be asking him questions for clarification. After that, the press and the public will be able to ask him questions as well. Understand, the purpose of this is to find out more about funding law and referendums. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Mr. Manager, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Three things that I'm going to do. First, I'm going to tell you who I am and why I'm here. Then I'm going to tell you about the law of referendums in this state. And then I'm going to speak briefly to how that applies to my understanding of the circumstances in Scotland County. First, who I am and why I'm here. As the chairman said, I'm from the School of Government at the University of North Carolina. We work to help units of government in North Carolina do their work better. Cities, counties, school administrative units, state agencies, we work with all of them in an impartial, unpolitical kind of way to help with many aspects of their work, especially the law as it applies to their work. A bunch of us are lawyers. I'm here because of an invitation that I received from your county manager asking me if I would come and speak to the law of referendums in this state. Well, I am a lawyer. I've been around a long time. I've paid a lot of attention to elections law in North Carolina. I love elections law. And so I thought, oh, those folks down in Scotland County, they must love elections law as much as I do, and they just want to know about referendums. It was only after I had agreed and said yes that I understood that there is a particular issue at work that maybe triggered the interest. So I just want to let you know that I agreed to come and talk about the law of referendums before I even knew that you all had anything in particular that you were considering. So that's me and how I come to be here. So now let me talk for just a moment about what I will call the rule of referendums in North Carolina. And here is the rule. The rule of referendums in North Carolina is no referendum may be held unless there is a specific authorization in law allowing it to be held. That's the rule of referendums in North Carolina. No referendum may be held unless there is a specific authorization in law authorizing that referendum to be held. An example of how that gets applied. Back in 1969, a county in North Carolina, back in the days before 911, I understand we're right beside your 911 center here. Back in the days before 911, a particular county in North Carolina put into place a county ambulance service. And it ran along for a few years, but it ran into some local opposition. And so the county commissioners thought it would be a good idea to have a referendum of the voters. Should we continue the county ambulance service? And the question was put to the North Carolina Attorney General, may we have such a referendum? And the North Carolina Attorney General applied the North Carolina rule of referendums. The North Carolina rule is no referendum may be held unless there is a specific authorization in law. And you can search through the North Carolina general statutes. In 1969, no authorization for a referendum on county ambulance service. And so the Attorney General told that county, no matter how good an idea you may think it would be for there to be a referendum on this question, you just can't do it because of the rule of referendums. Well, this rule of referendums applies to referendums of all kinds, including, for instance, referendums on borrowing money. A county, a city, any other unit of government in North Carolina might want to borrow money to do some particular thing. If a county wishes to have a referendum on borrowing money in a particular situation, it must be able to point to an authorization in law to authorize that referendum because of the rule of referendums. If you're going to have a referendum, you've got to be able to point to an authorization in law to do it. So, what if a county wants to borrow money for a particular circumstance, like school construction? May it hold a referendum on the question of whether to borrow the money for that particular project, in this case, school construction? The answer is yes, but only in one specified situation. In all other situations, it may not hold such a referendum. The one particular circumstance in which a county might be borrowing money for school construction or for any other purpose, we're talking about school construction, the one circumstance is when the county is issuing what are called general obligation bonds. There are many ways in which a county might borrow money. One of them is through the issuance of general obligation bonds. When it issues general obligation bonds, there is authorization for a referendum. General obligation bonds, what does that mean? That means the county, in borrowing money, is pledging what is said to be the full faith and credit of the county to repay the bonds. The county, when it issues general obligation bonds, is saying, we are going to pay you lenders back. You people who have bought our bonds, we are so certain, so dedicated to paying you back, that we will raise taxes ever how much it takes to get enough money to pay you back. Well, that's a big deal. The county pledging its full faith and credit. The county pledging its taxing power to pay back these bonds. Those are what are called general obligation bonds. And the issuance of general obligation bonds is such a big deal, pledging the full faith and credit of the county, that the North Carolina Constitution and the statutes under it require a referendum. So there's the authorization for a referendum when a county is issuing general obligation bonds. It's not merely that there's an authorization, there is a requirement. Okay. So that's for general obligation bonds, a requirement of a referendum. But of course, nothing is as simple as you wish it would be. There is an exception to the requirement of a referendum when you have general obligation bonds. When a county has general obligation bonds outstanding, so as it goes along, it's paying off the debt. Every year, it's paying off the debt, but there's still debt, there's still bonds outstanding. It might wish to issue new general obligation bonds. And this exception says that you can, in that circumstance, issue new general obligation bonds without a referendum if the amount of the general obligation bonds that you're issuing in this time is no more than 2/3 of the amount that you paid off on the old bonds last year. So if you're issuing new general obligation bonds in a small enough amount that it's less than 2/3 of the amount that you paid off last year on your old general obligation bonds, you don't have to have a referendum. But there is a provision in law that says, in that circumstance, where you're doing what are called 2/3 bonds, little enough bonds, general obligation bonds, little enough that it's not as much as 2/3 of what you paid off on your old ones last year, you can do it without a referendum, except here is a statute. GS 159-60. GS 159-60 says, in that circumstance, where you're doing these 2/3 bonds and you decide, general obligation bonds, and you've decided to do it without a referendum, people in the county might think that's not a good idea. Don't do that. And if people in the county in that circumstance think that's not a good idea, they can get up a petition. And if 10% of the voters in the county sign the petition, that forces a referendum on these new general obligation bonds. Okay, so the general rule. Well, the rule on referendums, you can't have a referendum unless it's authorized. General obligation bonds generally require a referendum. That's the authorization. These 2/3 general obligation bonds can be done without a referendum, except the voters in the county can get up a petition and force a referendum. So that's all about general obligation bonds. But there are other ways for a county to borrow money. The county can borrow money through what's called installment financing. It's what once upon a time was called certificates of participation, and what are sometimes called limited obligation bonds. Installment financing is the common term. That's a way for a county to borrow money for something like school construction. Can you have a referendum when you're having that kind of borrowing? Well, the rule of referendums says you can't have a referendum unless there's authorization. So you look to the law of installment financing, and there is no authorization. There's simply no authorization for referendums with that kind of borrowing. So what that means is, according to the rule of referendums, without the authorization, you cannot have the referendum. It's not an option. It's not like, oh, it would be a good idea to have a referendum, so let's have it. It's that you can't have it. That's true for other kinds of borrowings that counties might do, revenue bonds, special obligation bonds of one sort or another. No authorization for a referendum. You can't do it because there's not a referendum. So, the last thing that I want to talk about is my understanding of the situation here in Scotland County. My understanding is that you all are in the process of installment financing, limited obligation bonds, it might be said, what used to be called certificates of participation, for school construction. And some folks would like to have a referendum. May the county have a referendum? And the answer is no. It's not that the commissioners don't want to have a referendum, or the commissioners are trying to duck a referendum. It's that the law prohibits a referendum. How come? Because the rule of referendum says you may have a referendum only if there's specific authorization. And for this kind of borrowing, there is not specific authorization. And without the authorization, you can't have a referendum. It's not a matter of choice. So, Mr. Chairman, that's my understanding of the rule of referendums, my limited understanding of Scotland County's current situation, and I'd be glad to take questions or whatever anybody would like to do.
So I do have one question. So on the two-thirds bonds, so on the two-thirds bonds, is the, not that it really matters, but is the two-thirds amount the amount of the balance that you're paying off, or is it based on the original value of the original amount of the bond?
It is 2/3 of the amount that you paid off last year.
Okay.
So if it was originally $20 million of bond, and last year you paid off $1 million of it, well, this year you could issue $667,000 of bonds without a referendum. But a referendum could be forced through the petition because it's a general obligation bond.
Any other commissioners have questions?
I have a question that I hear in the community, and maybe you can answer it for, me and for the population. There seems to be a sentiment that we could take this 25 million estimate on school construction that we borrow and do other stuff with it.
Well, that may well be true, but it's way beyond anything I can talk about.
But if we borrow it under the installment financing, we don't have the means to pay it back. But that is a sentiment that's here in the county, that we borrow $25 million.
I don't believe that is anything that Mr. Joyce is talking.
I can tell you it's not anything I'm qualified for.
Any other commissioner have questions?
I want to clarify, one issue that's been brought up is the local option quarter-cent sales tax. How can you have a referendum for it, but not for borrowing?
How come you can have a referendum on the quarter-cent sales tax, but you cannot have a referendum on this kind of borrowing? The answer is the rule of referendums. There is statutory authorization for a referendum for the quarter-cent sales tax. But there is no authorization for a referendum on this kind of borrowing. There are authorizations for referendums of many, many kinds, in addition to general obligation bonds, all kinds of things. there is an authorization to have a referendum on the creation of a mosquito control district. Why is there an authorization for a referendum on the creation of a mosquito control district, but there's not a referendum on this kind of borrowing? I can tell you why. It's because the General Assembly said so. When the legislature passes an authorization for a referendum, you can have it. But until the legislature passes such an authorization, you cannot. And I will tell you a little bit of the philosophy behind that. It's not quite just because the General Assembly is the thunderhead. It's this. When we elect our representatives onto the county commission, onto the city council, onto the school board, we give them the power to make laws on our behalf. And if we don't like the laws that they pass, the option is to vote for somebody else next time. But it's actually a step further than that. It's not merely that we authorize our representatives to make laws. We charge them with the obligation of making the laws. The obligation to use their legislative thinking caps to put their brains together, to take the interests of all the people in the county into account, to come together on what needs to be done. And if the voters don't like it, vote them out. Other states have different ideas. In California, you can have referendums on all kinds of things. They're going to have a referendum in California in November on whether to divide into 3 states. We're not going to have such a referendum in North Carolina, I'll guarantee it. We have a different view of referendums. We are limited by the rule of referendum.
Any questions from members of the press?
Speak up.
With regard to voting on a referendum, when you vote on a referendum, you're voting on taxing authority simply, and not on what the referendum is financing. Is that correct?
That's correct. When there is a referendum with respect to general obligation bonds, which are the kinds of bonds that you can have a referendum, the question that the voters are voting on is, shall the county be authorized to issue these bonds, not must it?
Yes, one quick one if I can. You referred a few minutes ago to California.
I'm so sorry for that.
You referred a few minutes ago, and I'm wondering, how, among the states, among the 50 states, is this view of referendums more the norm than what California does?
There is a wide variety among the states, and generally speaking, the farther west you get, the more receptive to referendums generally the states are. And the further east you are, the older the states, the more tied to the old English ways of doing things, the less receptive to referendums. But that's not entirely true. Connecticut is pretty open to referendums. So there's not any one rule. North Carolina, I think, is sort of at one end of the spectrum, but there are other states with us.
What we are in the process of moving forward is the issuance of limited obligation bonds, which has kind of been the plan. It's what we did several years ago, and I think what the intention of this board has been, and at least at this point continues to be.
And if you wish to have a referendum on that question, you could not.
Any member of the public? Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, this My understanding that, that because general obligation bonds, are the most secure type of bond, they have generally have lower interest rates than limited obligation bonds because you're pledging full faith and credit with tax authority. So with the opportunity to get the lowest possible interest rate on your loan, why would a county choose to go the limited, for a project that there's clearly authorization, like new school construction, like we have here, where the county clearly can issue general obligation bonds should they choose to? Why would a county choose to instead go for a more expensive way of issuing bonds?
Another question that I am delighted to say is beyond my expertise, and it's not something I'm qualified to comment on to you or anybody else.
But there is the authorization to, this county has the statutory authority to issue general obligation bonds and hold a referendum on this loan.
Yes, Scotland County,
They can do that.
Scotland County is authorized to issue general obligation bonds.
So why does
And-
one county decide, because Moore County just had a big bond issue that they put before the voters. We see up in your area all the time, counties, when they embark on a major school construction project, put it to a referendum vote to issue general obligation bonds. Why, in your experience, why would a county forego the opportunity to get the most advantageous lending characteristics?
Well, you put that as in my experience. I have no experience that will allow me to comment on that. That's not elections law. That's a county finance question that's just simply beyond my expertise.
You couldn't hazard a guess why a
Well, I could hazard
county
a
would
guess,
choose.
the very word hazard.
But just to make that point, because it seems to be they want the dialogue to be that we all understand that limited obligation bonds might not be required to be put to the vote, but that doesn't mean that they don't have the opportunity, that this could be put before the voters to vote on this. They do have the statutory authority to make this a referendum situation.
Scotland County does have the authority to issue general obligation bonds.
The other question I had was that I question, we put this question to our state senator, and they responded that, their office responded that, let me just get the email out of here right now, from Senator McGinnis' office, said the statute, Article 4, Chapter 159 of the General Statutes, which is known as the Local Government Bond Act. That article governs both debt that is required to be put to the vote of the citizens under the North Carolina Constitution and debt that is not required to be put to the vote of the citizens. The statute GS 159-60 would allow the qualified voters in the jurisdiction to petition for a vote of the citizens for debt that is not required to be voted under the North Carolina Constitution. In order to trigger a vote, at least 10% of registered voters must sign a written petition. And I have to say that, the way 159-60, it makes no reference of what type of bond. And these are bonds that, it just says a petition demanding a bond order. Now, it's in a chapter that discusses general obligation bonds, but nowhere does it say that this is all referring to general obligation bonds.
Right, and I completely agree with you that 159-60, which is a statute about getting up to 10% petition and forcing a vote, cannot be on its face read to understand just on reading it that it's talking only about general obligation. But I can tell you, from my understanding, from those folks who know this stuff in a way that I don't, because my expertise is in elections law and referendums, is that this statute does not authorize any kind of petition with respect to bonds except 2/3 general obligation bonds. I will agree with you, you can't look at it.
Who did you consult for that?
I consulted primarily with my colleague at the School of Government, who is our local government finance person, but I talked with other people as well. I talked with a lawyer who called me, I didn't call her, a lawyer for the school system. And I spoke with, who else did I speak with?
Is there case law on that?
Oh, yeah. I believe that this is not an open country.
George, you may or may not, in this meeting, feel qualified to answer. If any, I would assume the issuance of limited obligation bonds is a very common occurrence in America.
Sure.
For school construction?
I don't know. I think so, but I'm not really qualified to say.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I just have one. So just to sum it up.
Nice and loud, please.
Okay. So to sum it up, basically saying that unless the commissioners themselves decide to do an obligation bond, that it can't be done under joint statute.
Yes, a referendum on the question of borrowing may be done only with respect to general obligation bonds. And it is the commissioners who have the authority to decide whether or not to issue general obligation bonds. Yes.
Okay, that's all.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So essentially, just to clarify, unless there's a rule provision to give referendum can't be given, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So the only way that, the only reprieve that citizens have at this point is to elect new leadership in the future, maybe to prevent an issue like this from happening again per se? Or is that outside of your expertise?
Well, that's just common sense. If you don't like what the current leaders are doing, you elect somebody else.
If new leadership was elected, could this whole situation be reversed at some point?
Now, past my expectations.
I just got a quick clarifying on the general obligation and the limited obligation. General obligation, I understand that the lender comes in and says, hey, you gotta raise taxes, you can't pay this, right? Limited obligation does not have that requirement from the lender, but it has it in the contract that if you can't pay it, common sense says you gotta raise taxes. It's just not part of the bond itself, correct? Outside, okay, sorry.
No, I'm glad to say that. It relieves me of having to say something I don't know.
Yeah, that's why I think that I mean, we asked the attorney to do a search on case law regarding this, and the only thing that we found supported that with the ballot petition, any type of bond offering could be forced through a referendum, not just a general obligation bond. But I mean, to see Tim's point that you know that's why I think the petition has the legal validity that in effect they are committing the citizens to they are committing the taxing authority, because like in this situation they're going to list as collateral the building itself, that they're going to borrow $25 million and list as collateral the building itself of the school, correct? Is that correct, Mr. Patterson?
We don't know what the final number is, but that's probably going to be in the advertisement at the top.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the second that building is built, the $25 million school in Scotland County, it is no longer worth, 25. I mean, you couldn't sell a school building in Scotland. I mean, if they couldn't make the note, there's no way that no one's, and you could sell that building for $25 million. So you are, encumbering the citizens with the responsibility for covering those payments. And that's why I think there's the theoretical justification for saying that any type of bond, should be able to be petitioned, to be put before the voters. But you say there is case law saying that you can't force a limited obligation bond to be put before the voters.
Not merely can you not force it, it can't be done even if voluntarily wanted it.
I just think without it being clearly stated in the general statutes where they don't say, that only a general obligation bond, the petition can only be for general, they just say a bond, period, as you know.
Yeah, and I wish that this was the only section of the general statutes that was unclear.
Any other questions, any comments? Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Joyce, hi, I'm Dale Farber, the Director to the Board of Elections, and I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your knowledge with Stoutland County. I think it's something that everybody here needs to hear.
Well, thank you very much. And I enjoy so much working with county elections.
I too, thank you for taking the time to be with us here today. I appreciate your knowledge and your continued work.
Well, thank you very much, and good luck with all this.
Please, the chef will appreciate it. If we no other business before this board, we'll have a motion that we adjourn. Commissioner Cook, second by Commissioner Alford, all in favor, say aye. Those say nay. Ayes have it. Thank you.